So guys, everything is changing. The industry as we know it is, well, in a very different place to the way it was even 5 years ago. And now that we're proceeding into the latter half of this current generation, it seems to me at least that next gen is going to be the last typical generation. And what I mean by that is that all of the console manufacturers seem to be going in their own direction at like polar opposite ends of each other. We have Xbox going in this more software oriented digital anywhere route, with branded hardware support and kind of pushing their agenda forward with the likes of multiple different styles of the ways you can play their games and the different platforms that you can play their games on. We also have Nintendo doing their own thing, which they're kind of competing more closely with the likes of portable PCs from Valve, Asus, and Ioneo and such. And then we have PlayStation, which is sort of rumored to be adopting this multi-platform approach with a more portable, dedicated device working with the likes of both a typical home console at the same time. And all while this is going on, we can't forget that the substantial rise in the PC community is kind of just sitting back at this point, kind of laughing at all of this unfolding right before them as they sort of patiently wait for everything to come to their platform, inevitably. So as someone who grew up in the 90s and then heavily gamed in the 2000s and also covered this industry all throughout the 2010s, I have to say that it's all quite worrisome thinking that the way I used to love to game, the platforms that I love to game on, and even the games that I love to play, they're all sort of evolving and becoming almost unrecognizable. Now, I want to be absolutely clear here. I'm not against change in any way. In fact, I would say I'm a big advocate for having things continue to change, evolve, and grow. Innovation in of itself requires disruption. And if all we ever did was sort of, take a look back at like the typewriter, for example, and just say, well, it's good enough, then we wouldn't have computers or anything like the amount of freedom that we have today. So I'm happy for change, and I do look forward to new technology and new ways to experience it. But at the same time, there's this sort of mission statement of play anywhere at any time on anything. And it seems to have regressed in the type of kind of raw personalities that these products used to offer us alongside the actual gameplay experiences. It's just that I feel we are so far removed from the idea of unique, highly advanced architecture. These days everything needs to be compatible with each other, and this does bring great advancements and ensures things like backwards compatibility is supported, which is extremely important. But, I do miss the days where we had just new, interesting hardware that, while may not have panned out in the end, it brought with it some crazy innovative gameplay solutions, and also this phase of experimentation as developers were constantly challenged to push the hardware to its limits, finding out different ways to optimize and sort of, get things to run on sort of power constrained systems. Now, I suppose in broad terms, nothing has really changed these days, but I have to say the biggest issue I see today is optimization. And at least from a casual, non-engineering perspective here, it seems that the more advanced visuals that are brought about by game engines, such as, what Unreal Engine 5 is doing and the constant iterations of that engine, the more concerning it is that in order to enjoy all this beauty, it's going to require just a substantial amount of hardware. And even with the best case scenario, let's say RTX 5090, best GPU you can buy, you're still going to be adopting upscaling and frame generation in order to get something that's playable and enjoyable. And I'm just wondering, at what point do we sit here and try to focus on what really is important, which is that, the gameplay systems are there and that's sort of at the forefront. Instead, it just seems to be that we're pushing more and more advanced ways to make lighting look better or to make reflections look better. It seems to be going in this really weird direction. And in order to enjoy all of this, you just need to open up your wallets and then use AI upscaling to make things just look fantastic. I really do miss the days where we were consistently surprised by the new hardware and how developers were utilizing it. And I think that the last time that I felt quite shocked was when I invested in the Steam Deck OLED. But my impression there came from getting to experience games from my teenage years, which I just remember being absolutely gorgeous, and my mind was just blown in terms of like the visuals they were pushing at that time. But getting to re-experience those games on this small little device, albeit with this gorgeous OLED screen, but seeing all those games with their best visual settings, with their highest fidelity and frame rates, all in the palm of your hands. I mean, the deck really put that into perspective for me, just how far we've come with technology. But even from back then, you used to be able to see just how drastic games looked over the course of an entire generation. And you look at the PS2 launch titles and you compare them to even the games from 2006 at the end of that console's life cycle, and it just shows this substantial increase in visual fidelity despite the power constraints. And we also saw something similar with the PS3 and 360, and I would argue that we didn't quite get that same wow factor with the PS4 and Xbox One, or rather it just came later on in that generation. It seemed to be more about advancements in post-processing and also the maturity of these effects that brought something with it that looks suitably filmic. But I'm wondering, what is that jump gonna look like for this generation? These days cross-generation is still very prevalent. We're seeing games that look good, but a lot of games these days just look like prettier, more refined versions of the games that we used to get. Like you could imagine, okay, this looks good, but it's going to run much worse on like a PS4, for example. What is that going to look like for this current generation? I do see some outright gorgeous games these days, but just conceptually, I feel that the developers, what the developers are doing with the gameplay just doesn't seem to have been brought nearly as far. And I'm just not sure if we will ever see advancements in hardware like we used to, or at least substantial jumps in rendering that just create this real divide between console generations. I feel as we're going into this next gen, cross-generation just is going to be a thing that's always going to be present. And maybe like a PS6 Pro, for example, will be similar to like the disc tray add-on for PS5, where you just kind of slot in this extra GPU source, and whatever the power increase for that console is, it will just, automatically detect and run. I'm not sure, guys, but in any case, let me know what you guys think. I guess for like the rest of you, I'm just along for the ride and we're just gonna have to wait and see. But I appreciate you all watching, tuning in. Let me know your thoughts, and we'll catch up later. Thanks.